I found out on a Tuesday. Not from my husband. Not from my sister. From a photograph. My cousin posted it on Facebook. A hospital photo. My sister, in a bed, exhausted and smiling. 2 newborns in her arms. And a caption that said, "Welcome to the world, little ones." So proud of their daddy. Their daddy. I stared at that caption for a long time. My brain kept trying to make it mean something else. Something innocent. Something that wasn't what it obviously was. Then I looked at the date. 8 months ago, she had told me she was pregnant. She had cried when she told me. Said the father wasn't in the picture. Said she was scared. I had held her hand. I had told her I would be there for her through everything. I had meant it. I clicked on the photo to see who had liked it. My husband had liked it. 11 hours ago. At 2 in the morning. I put my phone down. I picked it up again. I put it down again. Then I called him. He answered on the second ring. Casual. Easy. Like a man with nothing to hide. "Hey, you okay?" "I saw the photo," I said. Silence. Not the silence of a confused man. Not the silence of someone trying to understand what photo I meant. The silence of someone who has been waiting for a specific call and has just received it. "Sarah," he said. That was all. Just my name. And in the way he said it, I knew. Everything. Instantly. Completely. I had been married to Daniel for 5 years. We had met at a work conference, gotten engaged after 2 years, married in the kind of outdoor wedding I had planned since I was 12. It had felt, for most of those 5 years, like a good marriage. A real one. I had believed that completely. My sister, Maya, is 3 years younger than me. We had been close our entire lives. The kind of close where you share everything. Secrets, clothes, fears, inside jokes that nobody else understands. She was my maid of honor. She gave the speech at my wedding that made our mother cry. She had stood at the altar beside me while I married Daniel. She had stood right there. Beside me. And smiled. I think about that a lot. How long? I asked Daniel, on the phone. "Sarah, let me come home and we can." How long? Another silence. 2 years, he said. 2 years. Maya had been my maid of honor 2.5 years ago. Which meant that somewhere between the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon, this had already started. Or had never stopped. "Are they yours?" I asked. "The twins." He didn't answer immediately. Which was its own answer. "Yes," he said finally. I hung up. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect tears in moments like this. There were no tears. There was something colder than tears. Something very still and very certain settling into my chest like a stone dropping into water. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Daniel came home 20 minutes later. He had clearly been driving when I called. He came through the front door with his keys still in his hand and his coat still on, and he looked at me sitting on the sofa in the living room, and he had the expression of a man who has been rehearsing a speech in the car and has just realized it is entirely inadequate. "I need to explain," he started. "You don't," I said. "Sarah, please just listen." "My sister," I said. "My sister, Daniel." He sat down across from me. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at them. "I know," he said. "Tell me one thing," I said. "Did she know about me and you when it started? Was she someone you met randomly, or did she know she was?" "She knew," he said quietly. There it was. I stood up. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To the guest room," I said. "You're sleeping somewhere else tonight. Can we please just talk about this?" I turned around and looked at him. This man I had married. This man I had built a life with. This man who had stood across from me at an altar and said the words and looked me in the eyes while he said them. "There is nothing to talk about," I said. "You have 2 children with my sister. They were born yesterday. And you liked the photo at 2 in the morning while you were lying in bed next to me." He flinched at that last part. "Good. I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow," I said. "Tonight, I need you to not speak to me." I walked to the guest room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and I thought about Maya holding those babies. About Daniel at 2 in the morning, phone in hand, in the dark beside me, pressing like on a photo of his children that my sister had just had. About the fact that I had been in that hospital, 4 months ago, for Maya's 20-week scan. I had driven her. I had sat beside her. I had watched the screen and said they look healthy, and she had nodded and squeezed my hand. She had squeezed my hand. I didn't sleep. I didn't expect to. I lay in the dark and I let myself fully understand, piece by piece, the shape of what had been happening around me for 2 years while I believed I was living inside a completely different story. By the time the sun came up, I had stopped being stunned. I had started being decided. I called the lawyer at 9 the next morning. She was someone my colleague had used, a family law attorney with the specific efficient warmth of a person who has guided many people through the worst weeks of their lives and has learned exactly how to be useful without being performative about it. I told her what I needed. She said she could have the papers ready within the week. I said that was fine. I did not call Maya. I did not go to the hospital. I did not send a message. I had nothing to say to her yet that would not be something I regretted, and I had learned, somewhere in the 31 years of my life, that the words you say in the first 48 hours of a wound like this are not the words that matter. The words that matter come later, when the shock has settled into something you can actually think inside of. Daniel tried 3 more times that day to start a conversation. Each time I told him I was not ready. Each time he retreated. By the evening he had packed a bag and asked if I wanted him to stay elsewhere for a while. I said yes. He left. And I stood in the house that had been ours and looked at the kitchen and the sofa and the bookshelves we had built together, and I thought, this is the last week this will all be mine. After the lawyers are done, none of this will look the same. And then, this surprised me, I thought, good. I called Daniel's mother on the 3rd day. Not because I wanted to. Because she had called me twice and I felt, in some complicated way I couldn't entirely articulate, that she deserved to know that I knew. That the pretense was over. That whatever had been maintained through her family's silence was not going to be maintained any longer by mine. She picked up on the first ring. "Sarah," she said. And the way she said my name, with a specific, weighted quality, a careful quality, told me immediately that she had been waiting for this call too. That she knew something had happened. Or perhaps that she had known something would eventually happen. "I know about the twins," I said. A long pause. "I know about Maya," I said. Another pause. And then Margaret, my mother-in-law of 5 years, said something that stopped everything. Her voice dropped. Almost to a whisper. "She didn't tell you," she said. And in the way she said it, the specific, horrified quality of those 4 words, I understood immediately that she was not talking about the twins. She was not talking about Daniel. She was talking about something else entirely. Something Maya had not told me. Something that was, from the sound of Margaret's voice, considerably worse than everything I already knew. "What do you mean?" I asked. Margaret didn't answer immediately. I could hear her breathing. That's how quiet it was on the line. Just her breath, slightly uneven, and the specific silence of a woman deciding something. "I think," she said finally, "we need to meet in person." "Margaret. Tell me what you meant." "Not on the phone," she said. "Please. Come to the house tomorrow. I'll explain everything." I almost said no. Part of me wanted to say, "You don't get to control the timing of this. You don't get to ask me to wait one more day when I've already been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, for 2 years." But something in her voice stopped me. Not guilt exactly. Something older than guilt. Something that sounded like a woman carrying weight she had been carrying for a very long time and had finally been given permission to put down. "Tomorrow," I said. 10 o'clock. I didn't sleep again that night. The divorce papers had arrived that afternoon, couriered from the lawyer's office in a plain envelope that looked entirely ordinary for something that contained the formal ending of 5 years of my life. I had sat at the kitchen table and read through every page with the careful attention I bring to everything that matters, and I had signed where indicated, and I had put the papers back in the envelope, and I had felt, signing them, not grief exactly but something adjacent to it, the specific, quiet weight of closing a door you had believed would stay open indefinitely. Daniel had called while I was reading them. I had let it go to voicemail. He had left a message that was 3 minutes long. I had listened to the first 40 seconds, which contained his name and an apology and the beginning of an explanation, and then I had deleted it. I was not interested in his explanation. I had been interested in his explanation for approximately the first hour after I found out. By the time 48 hours had passed, the explanation had become irrelevant in the specific way that explanations become irrelevant when the fact they're explaining is sufficient on its own. He had 2 children with my sister. That was the fact. The explanation of how or why or what he had been feeling was not going to change the fact, and engaging with the explanation would require me to give him something I no longer wanted to give him, which was my attention. My attention, I had decided, was now mine. I arrived at Margaret's house at 10 the next morning. She lived 20 minutes from where Daniel and I had lived, where I now lived alone, which was still strange to say and stranger to experience, the specific strangeness of a house whose furniture has not changed but whose meaning has shifted entirely. Margaret opened the door before I knocked. She had been watching for me. She looked different from the last time I'd seen her, which had been at a family dinner 6 weeks earlier, a Sunday lunch that I now understood had been attended by a woman who knew what I didn't know and had sat across from me for 3 hours and passed me the potatoes and asked about my work and said nothing. She looked smaller. Tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been maintaining something effortful for a long time and has recently been relieved of the effort, not in a good way but in the way of a thing collapsing rather than being resolved. "Come in," she said. I came in. She had made tea, which told me she had needed something to do with her hands before I arrived. 2 cups on the kitchen table. A plate of biscuits neither of us was going to eat. I sat down. She sat across from me. I let the silence sit for exactly 5 seconds. Long enough to be deliberate. Short enough not to be cruel. "Tell me," I said. Margaret wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at it. She looked up at me. "How much do you know?" she asked. "I know about the twins," I said. "I know it's been 2 years. I know Maya knew about me and Daniel when it started. I know Daniel confirmed all of this." She nodded slowly. "What I don't know," I said, "is what you meant when you asked if she'd told me. Because the way you said it suggested there was something else to tell." Margaret set her mug down. "There is," she said. She looked out the window for a moment. Just briefly. The look of someone taking a last breath before something that can't be untaken. "Daniel didn't tell you how he and Maya met," she said. "I assumed they knew each other through me," I said. "They did," she said. "But not the way you think." She folded her hands on the table. They met before you and Daniel met, she said. Not long before. About 4 months before. I looked at her. 4 months before Daniel and I met, I said. So before the conference where we... Yes, she said. Something rearranged itself in my understanding. Quietly. The way furniture rearranges a room when you move one central piece. They had a relationship, Margaret said. Brief. A few months. Daniel ended it. He said it wasn't serious, that they wanted different things. Maya was, she paused. Maya was more invested than he was. She didn't take it well when he ended it. I said nothing. I was doing the calculation. The timeline. 4 months before Daniel and I met. He ended it. Then we met. Then we dated. Then we got engaged. She knew you and Daniel had met, Margaret said. He told her, early on, that he'd met someone. That it was serious. She asked who. He told her your name. I felt something cold move through me. She knew it was me, I said. Yes, Margaret said. Before she came to our first family dinner, I said. Before she met him again, officially, as my boyfriend. She already knew. Yes. She chose not to tell me. Yes. I sat with that for a moment. My sister had known that the man I was dating was her ex-boyfriend before she ever walked into a room and pretended to meet him for the first time. She had looked at me across our parents' dinner table when I brought Daniel home, and she had smiled and shaken his hand and said, "Nice to meet you." Nice to meet you. And Daniel had shaken her hand back and said the same words and looked her in the eyes and said the same words. They had performed an introduction that both of them knew was a performance. In front of me. Why didn't he tell me? I said. He said he didn't think it mattered, Margaret said. That it had been brief. That it was over. He convinced himself it was easier to leave it alone. And Maya? Margaret was quiet for a moment. I think Maya told herself the same thing, she said carefully. In the beginning. I think she genuinely tried to accept it. To let you have him. To be happy for you. But she didn't, I said. No, Margaret said. She didn't. I looked at my tea, which I had not touched. When did it start again? I asked. Between them. About 6 months after your wedding, Margaret said. 6 months after my wedding. They had sat at my wedding, both of them, and 6 months later they had started again. While Maya was still smiling at family dinners. While Daniel was still sleeping beside me every night. Who ended it the first time? I said. Daniel, Margaret said. And who started it the second time? Margaret hesitated. Just slightly. Just enough for me to notice. Maya, she said. I looked at her. She reached out to him, Margaret said. Daniel told me this. I'm not telling you to excuse him. I'm telling you because you asked and because you deserve the whole picture, not just the part that's easy to give you. Maya reached out to my husband, I said. Yes. And he responded. Yes. I stood up from the table. Not dramatically. Just because I needed to stand. I walked to the window and looked out at Margaret's garden, which was bare in the winter, and I stood there for a moment with my back to her. 2 years, I had believed I was in a particular marriage. 5 years total, I had believed I was in a particular sisterhood. And underneath both of those things, there had been a history I didn't know about, a prior relationship that had never been disclosed, a reconnection that had been sustained for 2 full years, 2 children born of it. And the whole time, Maya had known everything. She had known about Daniel and her before I ever brought him home. She had known when she stood at my altar. She had known when she held my hand at that 20-week scan 4 months ago and said they look healthy, doesn't it? She had known and chosen, at every single available moment, not to tell me. I turned back from the window. Is that everything? I said. Margaret looked at me. No, she said quietly. And her face, as she said it, the specific expression of a woman about to say something she has been dreading for longer than I could calculate, went pale. Not pale in the way of someone who is cold. Pale in the way of someone whose blood has gone somewhere else. Pale in the way of someone delivering news they genuinely wish they did not have to deliver. There's something else, she said. Something Maya knows that I think you need to know too. I sat back down. Tell me, I said. Margaret looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Before I tell you this, she said, I need you to understand that I wanted to tell you sooner. Many times. I almost did, on several occasions. I didn't, because Daniel asked me not to, and because I told myself it wasn't my information to give. But now it is. I said. Now, she said, I think keeping it from you is worse than telling you. I waited. When Daniel ended things with Maya the first time, she said, Maya was pregnant. The room went very quiet. She lost the baby, Margaret said quickly. Early. Before she even told anyone. She told me this herself, years later. She said she hadn't told Daniel. She had decided not to tell him because he had already ended things and she didn't want him to stay out of obligation. I was doing the timeline again. So before Daniel and I met, I said slowly, Maya had been pregnant with his child. Yes. And lost it. Yes. And never told him. Correct. And then I started dating him. Yes. And she watched that happen, I said. Knowing she had been pregnant by him. Knowing she had lost that pregnancy. And she said nothing. Nothing, Margaret confirmed. I sat with this. Really sat with it. Let it settle into the full picture I was building. Because here was the thing. Here was the thing that Margaret was telling me, perhaps without fully realizing all of what she was telling me. Maya had not simply had a brief relationship with Daniel before I met him. She had been pregnant by him. She had lost that pregnancy alone, without telling him, without telling anyone. She had then watched him fall in love with me. She had stood at my wedding. She had carried this specific, private loss through all of it. And then she had reached out to him. And he had responded. And 2 years later she was in a hospital bed with his twins. I was not excusing her. I want to be clear about that. What she had done was not excusable by any version of this story. But I was beginning to understand it in a way I hadn't understood it 90 seconds ago, and understanding something is not the same as forgiving it. Does Daniel know? I said. About the first pregnancy? No, Margaret said. Maya never told him. I only know because she told me herself, about a year after the twins were born. I think she needed to tell someone. I think she had been carrying it for too long. She told you, I said. My mother-in-law. Yes. But not me. Not her own sister. No. I stood up again. I needed to move. I walked to the window and back. I sat down. Why are you telling me now? I said. Margaret looked at me steadily. Because you're divorcing my son, she said. And you deserve to make that decision with the whole picture. Not the edited version that serves everyone else's comfort. I looked at her. That's the most honest thing anyone in your family has said to me in 5 years, I said. She nodded. She didn't disagree. I left Margaret's house 40 minutes later with the specific, dense weight of someone who has received more information than they were prepared to process in one sitting. I sat in my car outside her house for 10 minutes before I drove anywhere. I just sat, looking at the steering wheel, letting everything settle into its actual shape. Then I drove to Daniel. He was staying at a friend's place. He had texted me the address on the first day, in case of emergency, which I had thought at the time was an odd category to apply to himself but which I now understood was his way of not entirely closing the door. I texted him when I was 5 minutes away. He was waiting outside when I arrived. He looked like someone who had not been sleeping well, which was accurate and which I noted without particular sympathy because not sleeping well was, under the circumstances, an entirely appropriate consequence. I did not get out of the car. I lowered the window. "Get in," I said. He got in. We sat in the parked car outside his friend's building. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "I've just come from your mother's house," I said. Something shifted in his expression. "She told me about the first pregnancy," I said. He went still. Completely still. The specific stillness of someone who has just heard a sentence they did not expect and are trying to determine what it means that they've heard it. "Maya's pregnancy," I said. "Before you and I met. The one she never told you about." He stared at me. "You didn't know," I said. It wasn't a question. His face had told me immediately that he hadn't known. That this was information landing on him in real time, in a parked car outside his friend's building, from his estranged wife who had just come from his mother's house. "No," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. She was pregnant when you ended things," I said. "She lost it early. She decided not to tell you because you had already left." He looked out the windscreen. He said nothing. I watched him process this. I watched the specific sequence of it, the initial shock, the rapid backward assembly of a timeline he thought he understood, the particular, complicated expression of a man realizing that a version of events he had believed was complete had been significantly more layered than he knew. "When she reached out to you," I said. 2 years after our wedding. "Did she say why?" He was quiet for a long time. "She said she had never fully gotten over it," he said. "Over us." "She said she had tried and couldn't." "She didn't tell you about the pregnancy," I said. "Even then." "When she reached out?" "No," he said. "She never told me." "She reached out to you," I said, carrying that. "The loss of that pregnancy. For years of watching you married to her sister. And she still didn't tell you." I said this not to defend him. Not to suggest that his response to her reaching out had been inevitable or acceptable. I said it because I was thinking out loud, assembling the full shape of what my sister had been carrying and what she had chosen to do with it instead of simply speaking. "Daniel," I said. "I need you to answer me honestly. Not the version of honest where you tell me what you think I want to hear. Actually honestly." He looked at me. "Did you love her?" I said. "Maya." "Either time." "Did you ever actually love her?" He was quiet for a long moment. "The first time," he said carefully, "I think I could have. If I'd let it go further. But I ended it before it got there." "And the second time?" He looked out the windscreen again. "I don't know," he said. "I think I loved what it was. Not necessarily her specifically." "That's an honest answer," I said. "Not a good one. But an honest one." I started the car. "Sarah," he said. "I'm not coming back," I said. "Nothing your mother told me changes that. I'm telling you what she told me because you deserve to know it. About the pregnancy. About what Maya was carrying. Not because it changes the divorce." "I know," he said quietly. "But you should talk to Maya about it," I said. "Not for my sake. For yours." And for those children who are going to grow up needing their parents to have actually dealt with their history. He nodded. Slowly. He got out of the car. I drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. That had been a deliberate thing. I had decided somewhere between Margaret's kitchen and this parked car, that I was not going to spend any of the next chapter of my life looking backward at this one. The family chaos arrived the following weekend. My parents called. My mother first, then my father. They had known, I learned, that Daniel and Maya had known each other before. My mother had figured it out, about a year into my relationship with Daniel, when she noticed something between them at a family dinner that she couldn't quite name but that she had filed and not addressed, the way mothers sometimes file things they're not sure they have the right to open. She had not told me either. I want to be precise about how I felt when I learned this. Not explosive anger. Not the kind of betrayal that compounds everything else. Something quieter and more specific, the recognition that I had been, in some sense, the least informed person in my own life for several years, that people who loved me had been making decisions about what I should and shouldn't know, and that all of those decisions, however individually motivated by protection or discomfort or uncertainty, had collectively produced a version of my life that I had been living inside without access to its actual map. My father was the most direct. I should have told you when your mother told me what she noticed, he said. I convinced myself it was nothing. I convinced myself that if it were something, it would come out on its own. It did come out on its own, I said. Eventually. Not soon enough, he said. No, I agreed. Not soon enough. Maya called on the Sunday. 8 days after the photograph. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. I listened to it once. Her voice was exhausted and thick and she said my name several times and said she was sorry in a way that sounded genuine and was also, in my assessment, insufficient, not because I required any specific form of apology but simply because there is no voicemail that adequately addresses what she had done. I did not call her back that day. I sat with the voicemail and I sat with everything Margaret had told me and I sat with the image of my sister at that 20-week scan, holding my hand, and I tried to hold the full complexity of it. Not to simplify it into clean anger or clean grief or clean understanding. To hold it as the complicated, layered, genuinely painful thing it actually was. Maya had loved someone. She had lost a pregnancy alone. She had watched him marry her sister. She had tried, for a period, to simply accept that. She had failed. She had made choices that were genuinely harmful. She had kept secrets that were not hers to keep. She had prioritized her own complicated feelings over her sister's right to know the truth of her own life. All of those things were simultaneously true. I was not going to resolve them that Sunday. Or the Sunday after. Probably not for a long time. But I was going to start. I called Maya back on a Wednesday. 12 days after the photograph. 3 days after her voicemail. Long enough that I had moved past the version of myself that would have said things I didn't mean, and short enough that she hadn't yet assumed I was never going to call. She picked up on the first ring. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I know about before, I said. About you and Daniel. Before I met him. Silence. I know about the pregnancy, I said. A sharp intake of breath. Margaret told me, I said. Not to hurt you. Because she thought I deserved the whole picture. Sarah. Let me finish, I said. Please. She went quiet. I had prepared for this conversation. Not in the way of writing a script or rehearsing lines. In the way of sitting with everything I wanted to say until I found the actual version of it underneath the noise. I have been trying to understand, I said. Not to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But to understand. Because understanding feels like something I can actually do right now, and forgiving feels like something that isn't available to me yet. Okay, Maya said quietly. Here is what I understand, I said. You loved him. Before I met him. You lost a pregnancy alone. You watched me fall in love with him and you told yourself you could accept it. And then you found out you couldn't. She was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. What I don't understand, I said, is every decision after that. The silence at the beginning. The decision not to tell me who Daniel was when I first brought him home. The wedding. The 2 years. The hand-holding at the scan. Those things I'm still working through. I know, she said. Her voice was barely audible. I need to ask you something directly, I said. And I need you to answer me honestly. Not the version of honest that protects yourself. Actually honestly. Okay, she said. Did you ever intend to tell me? I said. At any point. Was there ever a version of this where you were going to tell me the truth? The silence was long enough that it was itself an answer. I told myself I would, she said finally. Many times. I had the conversation in my head dozens of times. Every time I saw you. Every family dinner. Every time you called me to talk about your marriage and I listened and said the right things. But you didn't, I said. No, she said. Why not? Another long silence. Because every time I got close to it, she said, I thought about what I would lose. You. Mom and Dad. The whole family. Everything. And I told myself one more week. One more month. That I would find a way to fix it before I had to say it out loud. And then I got pregnant and I thought if I just, she stopped. If you just what? I said. I thought if I just had them, she said, and if Daniel and I figured out a way to tell you together, it would somehow be less terrible than you finding out the other way. You were going to tell me eventually, I said. Not a question. A statement I was testing. Yes, she said. And then, more quietly, I think so. I hope so. You hope so, I said. She didn't answer. Maya, I said. The twins are real. They exist. They are going to be people who grow up knowing about all of this. Whatever you and Daniel and I do from here, those children are a fact. And I think, somewhere in the future, you and I need to figure out how to be in the same family as each other for their sake if not for ours. I know, she said. But I'm not there yet, I said. I need time. A lot of it. And I need you not to push. I won't, she said. And I need you to tell Mom and Dad, I said. Not because I want them to judge you. But because I'm not going to carry your secrets anymore. I'm done with that. A long pause. Okay, she said. Barely a whisper. One more thing, I said. Yes. The twins, I said. What are their names? A silence. Brief. Surprised. Lily and James, she said. I sat with that for a moment. 2 names. 2 small people who had been born into an impossibly complicated situation that they had done nothing to create and would spend years growing up inside of. Okay, I said. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time afterward. Not crying. Not relieved exactly. Somewhere in between those things. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. It was, by then, mostly paperwork. The emotional finalization had happened much earlier, somewhere between the photograph and the parked car outside Daniel's friend's building. The divorce had already happened inside me. The legal version was simply catching up. Daniel and I had one more real conversation, about 3 months after the parked car. He had called and asked if we could meet, and I had agreed because I think I needed it as much as he did. We sat in a coffee shop near my office, in a booth by the window, and we talked for 2 hours with the specific, exhausted honesty of two people who no longer have anything to protect. He told me he was trying to be present for the twins. That it was complicated. That his relationship with Maya was not a relationship in any romantic sense, that it had ended in the same week as my phone call, that what existed now between them was purely the practical management of two small people who needed both their parents to behave like adults. He said he was sorry. Properly this time. Not the 3-minute voicemail sorry. A specific, itemized sorry that named the actual things he had done rather than apologizing generally for the situation as though the situation had generated itself without his participation. I accepted it. Not because it undid anything. Because accepting it was a thing I was doing for myself, not for him. My relationship with Maya has been, in the year since the photograph, something I would describe as suspended. We are in contact. Barely, but we are. Text messages occasionally. A phone call once, about 2 months after the first one. Careful, as short, neither of us pretending we're somewhere we're not. My parents have been, throughout all of this, a steadier presence than I expected. My mother told me, about a month after everything came out, that she blamed herself for the things she had noticed and not said. That she had told herself it was nothing and had chosen to believe that because believing otherwise was too frightening to sit with. I told her I understood that. I did, genuinely. Understanding how people convince themselves not to see things has been one of the main projects of my year. My father has been, quietly and consistently, the person he has always been. Present. Reliable. Undemonstrative in the specific way of a man who expresses love through showing up rather than through saying so. He has called me every Sunday since the photograph. Every single one. We talk about ordinary things mostly. Work, the news, the small details of daily life. But he calls. Every Sunday. That matters more than I can adequately explain. I have been in therapy since February, 5 months after the photograph, and I want to say something honest about therapy that I think people don't always say, which is that it is not the place where things get fixed. It is the place where you learn to be honest about what actually happened and what you actually feel without immediately trying to resolve it into something more comfortable. What I have learned, in that room, is something I could not have learned any other way. I had been, for years, someone who prioritized the feelings of people I loved over my own access to the truth of my own life. Not in a dramatic, self-sacrificial way. In the quiet, daily way of someone who smooths things over, who gives benefit of the doubt generously, who interprets ambiguous evidence in the most generous available direction, who files discomfort rather than addressing it. That quality, which I had always understood as a kind of emotional generosity, had, in this specific situation, been used against me without malice but with consequence. The people who loved me had made decisions about what I should know because they had correctly calculated that I would absorb the discomfort of those decisions rather than demanding honesty. That is changing. It is changing slowly, in the incremental way that real things change, not through a single decision but through the accumulated practice of saying what I actually think and asking for what I actually need and refusing the particular, seductive comfort of pretending things are fine when they aren't. The house is mine. We agreed on this in the settlement, and I remained in it not because I am particularly attached to the building but because leaving felt, in the months immediately after everything, like giving something else up. And I had already given enough. I have redecorated 2 rooms. Small changes. New paint, different furniture arrangements, the particular, incremental process of making a space yours after it has been shared. I am going to do the kitchen next. I have 2 friends I have become considerably closer to in this year than I was before. The kind of closer that happens when people see you at your worst and stay. That kind of closer. I am not in a relationship. I am not looking for one. I am in the specific, surprisingly comfortable space of someone who has recently discovered that they are adequate company for themselves, which sounds like a small thing and is actually quite significant. Lily and James, the twins, are now 14 months old. I have not met them. I don't know if I will, or when, or in what context. That is a question that belongs to a future version of me and a future version of my relationship with Maya, if that relationship eventually finds its way to a form that makes meeting them possible and natural rather than forced and painful. What I know is that they exist. That they are people. That they did not choose any of this. And that whatever complicated feelings I carry about the circumstances of their birth, those feelings are mine to manage and are not, and will never be, their problem. That distinction matters to me. I am holding it carefully. There is one more thing I want to tell you. About 6 weeks after the photograph, I found an old video on my phone. From my wedding. Someone had taken it during the reception, a candid clip of about 40 seconds, and I had forgotten it was there. It showed Maya giving her speech. I watched it once. She was standing at the microphone in her bridesmaid dress, and she was talking about me, and what she said was specific and funny and genuinely warm in the way that only someone who has known you your entire life can be specific and funny and warm. She talked about things from our childhood. An inside joke that made half the room laugh without understanding it. Something our mother used to say. And then she said, looking directly at me, that I deserved everything good that was coming to me. That she meant that with her whole heart. That she was proud of me. And watching it, 6 weeks after everything, I believed her. Not that she was innocent. Not that what she did was acceptable or forgivable yet or perhaps ever. But that she had meant it. In that moment, in that dress, at that microphone, she had meant it. Both things were true. She had meant it. And she had still done everything she did. That is the most complicated thing I have learned this year. That people can love you genuinely and still cause you genuine harm. That sincerity and betrayal can live in the same person at the same time. That the explanation for why someone hurt you can be real and still be insufficient. Holding that complexity, without collapsing it into something simpler, is the work. I am doing the work. If you have ever been the last person to know something important about your own life, I hope this story reminds you of something. The people who kept the truth from you made a choice. But you get to make a choice too. About what comes next. About who you become on the other side of knowing. That choice is yours entirely.